Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll get started here. Thank you for joining us today for our Ask Me Anything presented by Innovate Pasadena. We do these Ask Me Anythings a couple times a month on various topics. And we are very honored today to have our next guest, Aaron Fyke, who is the founder and managing partner of Thin Line Capital. And he also happens to be a board member of Innovate Pasadena. And he will be answering your questions today about climate change and wildfires. So Aaron, I'd love to punt it over to you.
Okay, you can start the share anytime. Thanks everyone for attending. And I'd like to share with you some topical information that has been directly relevant to me. So my name is Aaron Fyke. I'm the founder and managing partner of Thin Line Capital. So we're part of the Wavemaker family of funds and focus on investments in early stage energy sustainability technology companies that are looking to help address the climate crisis. And so I regularly give detailed talks on the crisis that we're facing with regards to climate change. But a couple of weeks ago, that was brought into really sharp focus when the Bobcat fire kept me up at night with my cars loaded up, ready to evacuate, only 2 miles from my house. So I decided to host this AMA, mostly because the internet blew up with palpable rage at the family responsible for the El Dorado fire in Yucaipa with the gender reveal. And yet I felt that, well, you know, having an explosive pyrotechnic device at a gender reveal may have not been the smartest idea in wildfire season. I really felt that the real culpability lies in every corporation, every politician, everyone who has denied or downplayed the effect of climate change for the last 40 years. And it was really important that people understood what California's story has been, particularly in the last 4 years, because there is there's an amazing and disturbing turn of events. And so I'd like to share that story with you. So if we go to the first slide. So the story starts, for me at least, with a fire actually outside of California in 2016. So this fire was in the heart of the Canadian tar sands region, and it destroyed large parts of the city of Fort McMurray, Alberta. But what was amazing is it forced the evacuation of over 100,000 people. And this is when I first became aware that something was different with respects to wildfires, forest fires, bushfires around the globe. So turning to California, though, some of you may have seen these images from the Sonoma County fire in 2017. Next slide. And this is the outcome from the fires in Sonoma. You can see that they just obliterated this neighborhood in Santa Rosa. And you know, and the devastation across each of these homes at the time in 2017, I remember, was particularly unique and record-breaking, and that really isn't as unique and record-breaking anymore. If you go to the next slide. Turning to Southern California, in Burbank in September of 2017, the La Tuna Canyon fire was the largest in Los Angeles County history at the time. And yet, only a few months after that, before the end of 2017, the Thomas Fire beat that out and officially became not only the largest Southern California, but the largest wildfire on record in California, having burned over 273,000 acres at the time. And I remember, oh, sorry, next slide. There we go. So that's the Thomas Fire. All the yellow and orange looks very similar, but this was December 2017. And here's the headline that came out. So next slide, please, or next click, thanks. So California's biggest ever wildfire declared extinguished. Click. And that was published by SF Gate. Click. June 1st, 2018. December 2017, June of 2018. 6 months. But 6 months later, the fire was out. And that's great. That was the Thomas Fire. It was the biggest wildfire California had ever seen. But not 2 months after that, sorry, yeah, barely, end of July, start of June. was the Mendocino complex fire in 2018. And now this was the actual largest wildfire on record in California. It was 460,000 acres. It was 70% bigger than the Thomas Fire, and it was over half the size of Rhode Island. Next slide, please. So, but by the end of 2018, although this wasn't the largest fire, we had the Camp Fire. The fire had stretched 100,000 acres as of Saturday morning. 6,453 homes and 260 commercial structures were destroyed. Paradise, a community of 27,000 people north of Sacramento, was completely wiped out by the fire after it engulfed the area that Thursday. As of December of 2018, there were 85 people dead and 11 people missing. That fire was the most expensive natural disaster in the world that year. $16.5 billion in losses, and that accounted for 10% of global insured losses in 2018. And at the same time as the Camp Fire, next slide, was happening in Northern California, we had the Woolsey Fire here in Southern California. That was near Malibu. And so why is all this happening? So I've taken you from 2016 to 2019, the end of 2018. Next slide, please. And we see a very tight correlation between the hotter the temperature is, the more likely and more severe there'll be fires. Now, actually, realize the x-axis is cut off here, so that goes back to 1980. So this chart is over the last 40 years, and the y-axis is missing as well. There's a temperature rise from the middle of that axis to the top of about 3 degrees Fahrenheit. So we've seen a temperature rise over that period in the May to September average temperatures, and we've seen a correlation in the number of large fires in the Western US. And if you want to know why that temperature rise is occurring, there's a whole other talk that I can get to later. But that is the reason we're seeing these higher incidences in fires, that temperatures becoming higher and vegetation is drying out. Next slide, please. So turning to 2019 then, we had the Kincaid Fire, which grew to over 16,000 acres just within 24 hours. Next slide. And I tried to pick some fires and pictures that were relevant to Southern California. The Tick Fire, which people remember, nearly 50,000 people were ordered to evacuate. That was just a year ago. And next slide. I don't love, but this picture, the Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, you can see how the flames literally came up to its door. And so next slide. For context, the 3 most expensive wildfires in the world have in world history, not Southern California, not the US, world history, have happened in the last 3 years. 2018 was Camp and Woolsey, like I mentioned, and then the Tubbs Fire in 2017 with $9 billion in losses. So what is 2020 looking like so far? Given that there was a Bobcat Fire right outside my house, even though there have been fires all over, and now they're continuing in Napa and everything else. Go to the next slide. The Thomas Fire was the biggest wildfire on record in California's history, not 3 years ago, 2017. As of August 2020, the August Complex Fire has now broken that record, and the Mendocino Complex record in 2018. But what's amazing is the August Complex Fire is merely one of 4 fires that have happened this year, all of which have exceeded the Thomas Fire in size. The August Complex Fire is 840,000 acres. It is 3 times the size of the Thomas Fire, and it's about the size of Long Island, New York, to put that in context. So here's the point that I wanted you to take away from this AMA. Next slide. I was born in 1972. Since 1972, the average area burned each year in California has increased 500%. We are now burning, on average, the amount of area that's burned every year in California is 5 times bigger than was the case when I was born. Forest fires have happened in California forever, but they are not like they used to be. And that point really shocked me and really struck home. So next slide, please. The corollary of that is that the fire season in the US West is now 105 days longer than in the 1970s. And I give a number of talks on climate change, and I have this really great joke where I say, well, the good news is there are only 365 days. So, you know, there's an upper limit. And then Governor Newsom took my joke. Next slide. April 13th, 2020, he said, I would argue that there are no longer fire seasons in the state of California. That is the current state of play. California is 365 days a year at risk of the wildfires that we've seen and the ones that we've seen for the last couple of years, and they're only going to continue in size. So what has changed is the fire season has extended to now become the entire year, and the area that is burned is now 5 times bigger than it was when I was born. So I just wanted to leave you with this next slide, please. This is the webcam that I spent a number of my hours looking at over a week and a half period. 11 p.m., 1 a.m., 3 a.m., and 5 a.m. Was my schedule every couple hours to see if it was advancing. It was right next to Mount Wilson, which is a national treasure. Mount Wilson was saved. The fire did stretch from 2 miles away from my house all the way up to the northern edges of the Los Angeles National Forest, where there were a number of structures and homes that were burned down. But this was a very scary image. When people tell you to load up your cars with items that couldn't be replaced, that's when I realized like half my house was items that couldn't be replaced. So I thought that people needed to realize that things were different than they have been, and to put that difference in context. So that is the end of the formal part of my talk, and I'm happy to take any questions if people have any.
How much worse is it going to be?
How much worse is it going to be?
Yeah, and I know that's a loaded question. For me, it's one that puts anyone in a corner. I mean, the question should be more of what kind of data are we collecting that helps us get to more of a predictive model,
So that is a second question. It's but a very good one, actually. There's a lot of interesting work. The reason I could track that fire down to the 500-meter radius is because of satellite imagery that has been launched for tracking hotspots and doing fire prediction. So there are a number of efforts, technology companies that are responding to this, mostly with tracking and predicting algorithms. Although I'm less knowledgeable the chemical space, and there may be things happening in, say, improved fire retardants and that sort of thing. As for how much worse it's going to be, there's a couple layers to that. We have about 7 years remaining at the current rate we're emitting CO2 to left in our 2-degree carbon budget. So if we exceed 1.5 to 2 degrees, then we get into a regime where what we're talking about becomes the new norm. Every year there will be larger and larger fires. Every year there'll be more and more expensive structures that are being built, that are being burned down. So the real risk is going past an irreversible tipping point where the CO2 that's released from forest fires and the CO2 that's released from from melting, not CO2, but the heat that's trapped from ice that's melting and being absorbed in the oceans and a variety of other feedback loops. When that amount of CO2 that's being released is greater than all of humanity, then even if we cut our carbon emissions to zero, it's going to be hard to turn the ship. So that's why people talk about carbon budgets, because as the consequences of climate change occur, they release more CO2, which causes the consequences of climate change to accelerate. So yeah, that is it's a couple ways to tackle your question. Okay, so and then all right, so I will answer Jennifer's and then I will answer this one. So Jennifer said, what can private sector and individuals do without government or taxes since it's not looking likely? Well, the truth is, this is a systemic problem, and the way that collective organizations of humans handle systemic problems is they created a thing called government, because that is the method which is most efficient to enact broad-scale change. And the current administration, although it was actually nice to see climate change even mentioned in the debates last night, it's pretty clear that the current administration has no, no understanding, much less interest in addressing this problem. And whereas the Democrats are actually taking a much different view and using that to promote a jobs program. So that is encouraging, but the private sector and individuals, a lot of things are happening with renewable energy, that renewable energy is now substantially cheaper than fossil fuels. And so the market forces themselves are driving a shift away from carbon pollution. Without a carbon price, without government incentives or anything like that, it's just simply cheaper and better to use renewables. And so the vast majority of new built infrastructure is all zero carbon emissions. Back in 1992, California had a mandate to make 2% of their vehicles electric by 2002. It didn't work, didn't happen. And now in 2020, Newsom declares in 15 years, not 2%, but 100% of our vehicles will be zero emission. And that's far more credible. At the same time, our entire electricity grid in California is moving to be zero carbon by 2045, and that follows along with 15 other states that have pledged to do the same. So it's hard for individuals as consumers can drive the needle by doing things like installing solar panels or buying electric vehicles, but that's almost, if you are able to do that and have the means to do so, that's great, but that's not really the call to action. The biggest thing consumers can do is honestly vote and let governments know that this is an issue that matters to the populace. The question that was on the screen was, detail some of the mechanisms. So I did mention that basically what's happening is spring and summer are coming earlier and lasting longer. And so that does two things. One is that has the snowpack melting sooner, so there's less water available during the hottest months of the year, and vegetation has a lot more time to dry out. And the secondly is that as the external temperature is hotter, that sucks water out of the plants. So plants lose their water much more quickly, and there's less water to replace it. What's interesting though is that lightning strikes actually increase in warmer temperatures. And so lightning strikes increase by 12% for every degree of Celsius warming. So lightning strikes are a large part of what causes forest fires away from cities. And then humans are the biggest cause near populated areas, as we saw with the El Dorado fire. There's no word yet of what started the Bobcat fire. But my argument is that while maybe humans are the ones to light the match, the fact that all the fuel is there and the fact it's getting worse is the bigger issue. Australia, I assume you mean Australia rather than Austria. Australia has forest cities and exploding trees. I believe you, and they've had for a long time. I lived in Australia in 2007, 13 years ago, and they were seeing droughts and forest fires then of the order of which California is seeing now. Wildfires have always been part of California. Isn't this being opportunistic to take the current fires to promote a story? Well, it's absolutely being opportunistic to let people know when they are aware there's fire burning down their door, to let them know the changes that have happened in California. But I think the key thing is the changes. No one's saying that California hasn't had wildfires throughout its history. Just like when we talk about temperature change, people have, there have always been very hot days and very cold days. It's just that the number of hot days are exceeding the number of cold days dramatically, and the average has shifted. Just like Florida has always been susceptible to hurricanes, but the change is that the severity of the hurricanes and frequency of those hurricanes is much greater than it was. So no one is arguing that California hasn't always had to deal with fires. In fact, 1972, they had to deal with fires 1/5 in area than they have to do today. That's absolutely true. The important takeaway is that in the last almost 50 years, that number has gone up 5x. And when people talk about climate change, although climate is a very important word, the more important word is change. And it's very different now than it used to be, and that difference is accelerating. Here's another question somebody sent in. So with the accelerating placement of wind turbines around the world, do you think there will come a time when the drag effect may have a deleterious effect on weather patterns that move the wind, so to speak? So I was thinking when I was sent this yesterday, there's a couple of ways to answer this. One is the engineering approach, which is just to, do the math and show you how much the drag of wind turbines is. And being an engineer, I can't help but answer it that way. But there's a second way, which will put this into context of what we're talking about with wind turbines. So I'll start with the engineering way, but then I'll move into the second way. So the way wind turbines work is as the wind blows to the wind turbine, they spin the turbine and you generate electricity. If for that to work, the wind has to blow through the turbine. If in theory, the wind turbine were able to suck 100% of the energy out of the air, then the air would just stop when it hits the wind turbine. And of course, if the air stopped when it hit the wind turbine, it wouldn't work. So clearly wind turbines only take a small fraction of the energy out of the air. And the engineering question is, okay, well, so how much is that small fraction? So I went and dug this up for a typical 3 megawatt wind turbine and looked at the various efficiency factors, and basically at the low end, the speed of the wind coming out of the back of the wind turbine is 99% of the speed of the wind going into the wind turbine. And the theoretical maximum, which no wind turbine is even close to, but is theoretically possible, the velocity of the air coming out of the wind turbine is 97% of the velocity going in. So the truth is the wind turbines really don't drag the air down in any measurable way. The other interesting thing to note is, and I have other slides for this, but the amount of wind that's available could power the Earth's electricity 40 times over. So if we were 100% running our global economy off wind and wind alone, we could still do that 40 more times before we had actually captured all of the available wind resource available for capturing. And even if we did that, the wind coming out of the back of the wind turbines would be 97 to 99% of what was going in. So the short answer is no, there is no drag effect. However, what I like, sort of a longer answer here is, this is a similar question to bird strikes. Don't wind turbines kill birds? And the answer is, well, yeah, but so do buildings, and nobody has a problem with building new buildings. And more importantly, so does coal pollution by orders of magnitude, and that's not mentioned. So there's a similar question about, hey, well, electric vehicles, what about the toxicity of batteries, or what about solar panels? Can we recycle these? And I find those to be very interesting questions, because when you think of them, and that's very good that people are thinking of, the long-term effects of current products, given the situation we're in right now, the better question is sort of the comparative effect. And there really is no comparison when we're talking about getting rid of heavy metals and lead and coal ash pollution, as well as CO2 for removing a coal plant and replacing it with wind and solar and electric vehicles. And so I think the comparative answer is the right way to look at it. But on an absolute basis, no, we are nowhere, there is no global or local effect of causing mass drag with wind turbines.
So I do want to, I'll interrupt briefly, Aaron. I know you have a few extra minutes. You can go over a little bit, right? If people have questions, they can type it in the chat, or since we're a smaller group today, you could just jump right in and turn your volume on and ask your question if you're not shy.
Yeah, that's fine. I clearly love talking about this stuff.
That's a good thing. Since as we're waiting for additional questions, if we have any last minute asks, is there any one big point that you would want to share You know, I know you have a much longer version, but you know, what's a one big takeaway for everyone to know?
I think the one big takeaway is, you know, honestly, the one big takeaway is that if you want any action on climate at all, this election is more important than anything we've ever had in the past. And I don't mean to be partisan, but it has broken down that way. The best way to move the needle. So the Paris Agreement, you know, Trump has talked about taking us out of Paris. The deadline, the date when that actually happens is actually November 4th. It's one day after the US election. And the good news is the US is actually meeting its Paris commitments independent of the federal government through the fact that renewables have become so cheap, companies have moved to more efficient solutions and all those things. We're meeting our Paris commitments. But in my opinion, the real opportunity is being the leader of this in the world. And if we step back, we're just going to hand this whole industry, and this industry is going to be as big as the oil and gas industry and the coal industry combined, which there's a reason that the US dollar is the dollar that trades oil and gas globally. There's a reason that Houston is the city that it is. If we sit back and say this is not going to happen, then the US dollar is not going to be the dollar of relevancy. Houston is not going to be a city that's relevant, and that's going to be lost to another country. And so that's what's at stake in turning this around. And unfortunately, that's why it's become so stark for participating in the election.
And that dovetails into something that Jennifer is asking on chat, which is, what is your advice for dealing with climate change deniers?
So I don't have good advice. In my entire Innovate Pasadena history, which if you add up every networking event we've ever had, I probably had 1 million conversations with people in, you know, Pasadena and extended Southern California area. I have met 2, you know, climate deniers who actively wanted to sort of pick a fight. And I took that as an anthropological exercise, you know, like, oh, I'm visiting the tribe and observing their activities. You know, it was more like, look, you tell me why you think, like, in other words, me talking to this person, you know, why do you think the way they do, you know, why, you know, it's funny because back when I was at the X Prize in 2009, and then there was a lot more people who were questioning this or weren't sure. The only thing you have to believe is, do you believe that CO2, or do you recognize the fact that CO2 acts as a low pass filter, which is a very technical term that means, can sunlight go through one side but heat not go through the other? If that is true, everything else follows. Are we releasing more CO2? Yeah. So don't you think it'll trap more heat? Yeah. So don't you think this would happen? Yeah. So what it is generally when dealing with people, so you don't need to prove anything, at least directionally, everything follows as a thought experiment. So people generally just want to be heard. And climate change deniers distrust something. They may work for the oil and gas industry, in which case they distrust something because, you know, their entire career is wedded to that thing not being true. But there's a lot of smart people in the oil and gas industry. So I find actually I spend most of my time asking questions when I deal with climate change deniers and understanding what it is that drives, like, because climate change deniers, if they're really taking that position, are generally not interested in an earnest debate where you convince them. So there's really no point, unless you come across someone who's like seriously interested, like, wow, tell me about this. But then denial is not the right term. Those are people just interested, and then I can go on for hours. So I find that when talking with the climate change denier, the best thing to do is understand why they take the viewpoint they take, and not from some gotcha game. And don't try to convince them. Just try to understand. And then hopefully that'll soften their position, and it'll be someone else's job to convince them. That's what I've done.
A good approach.
So let me, do you want to just go to the last slide then?
Sure, let's do that.
Thanks, Jennifer. So I have a much larger talk, and I update it every year because, you know, when talking about massive global change, of course, everything is different year after year after year. So it's actually a lot of work, but and to fit in Zoom land, I've had to trim it down from 2 hours to 1 hour. But I will be giving this talk, the broader talk, specifically with a call out to the entire fund thesis that Thin Line Capital has, which is this is the biggest economic opportunity since the Industrial Revolution. We're literally revamping our entire economy, not just, you know, electric vehicles and coal, but building materials, food, ag, water, textiles, you know, literally every piece of the economy is being touched by this. And this is a massive, 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 massive opportunity for startups. This is when they talk about trillions of dollars, this is for real. So I am giving this talk as part of the Connect Week activity from 7 to 8:30 at night. It will be an hour long with a half-hour Q&A, and I'm really going to stick to that hour. But I think it's really interesting. I basically gave you the 10 fire slides out of that, so you've had the sampler. But the whole thing is in October. We do have a paid Zoom account. It has 300 seats. I actually think that's going to be a problem. So the people on this call get first dibs. I would highly suggest that you sign up because in Zoom world, I don't have to just give this to the Innovate Pasadena crowd. I'm throwing this open to my whole network, my investor set, people I know in MIT. So I think it's gonna be really interesting. I'm actually looking forward to doing it, but I think that it's worth signing up for. So if you want to hear the broader story, including some very good news of what's being done about it, which I didn't mention much at all, that's the October 22nd date.
Thank you, Aaron, so much for sharing this talk with us. And for everybody here, thank you for attending. If you want to know more about Connect Week events, go to innovatepasadena.org, sign up for the newsletter. Aaron's event will be listed. You want to sign up quickly for his event in RSVP so we don't hit that limit. And thank you so much for sharing this information with us today.
No, that was great. Thank you for listening. I appreciate that.
Thanks so much.
Bye now.